rest your mind. The journey begins in silence. Royal women of Europe once lived wrapped in silk, jewels, and absolute authority, yet many of them avoided water for years, trusted perfume over cleanliness, and wore dresses that had never met a wash. This was not ignorance or neglect. It was considered refined, sensible, and quietly superior. Tonight's story is about how power learned to smell elegant, look flawless, and politely ignore the body underneath. The night has a strange talent for shrinking things that once seemed enormous. Titles soften, crowns grow quiet, certainty loosens its grip. Stories that were once shouted through ceremony and tradition suddenly sound different when told in a lower voice, with no audience demanding admiration. This is one of those stories. When we imagine royal women of Europe's past, we rarely imagine bodies. We imagine surfaces instead. Silk before skin, pearls before pulse, faces frozen in oil paint, untouched by sweat, fatigue, or the inconvenient maintenance of being alive. Queens and duchesses drift through our imagination as if biology made a special exception for them. As if palaces were sealed environments where nothing smelled wrong, nothing ached, and nothing required cleaning beyond a symbolic gesture. It is a comforting image, carefully preserved over centuries, because it allows power to appear effortless. But history, when told slowly and without obligation to impress, has a habit of revealing the scaffolding behind such images. And once you notice the scaffolding, the illusion does not collapse dramatically. It simply becomes quieter, less convincing, more human, and perhaps more unsettling for that reason. Between the late Middle Ages and the early modern period, roughly from the 14th to the 18th centuries, cleanliness was not the moral or medical certainty we assume it to be today. In elite European society, especially among royal women, cleanliness was treated as a complicated negotiation rather than an obvious good. Water existed, soap existed, servants existed. What restrained their use was belief. Medical thinking of the time imagined the body as a delicate system of balances and openings, vulnerable to disruption. Warm water in particular was thought to relax the body too much, to soften its defenses, to invite illness rather than prevent it. The skin was not considered a barrier, it was considered a gateway. In this framework, bathing too often was not refined. It was careless. Prudence meant restraint. Wisdom meant avoidance. And so many royal women lived at a cautious distance from water, not loudly, not defiantly, but quietly and consistently. This distance was supported by physicians, normalized by etiquette, and reinforced by a shared understanding that survival, not comfort, was the goal. In this world, endurance was elegance, and discomfort was simply part of looking correct. If water was viewed with suspicion, scent was embraced with enthusiasm. Perfume did not exist merely as decoration. It functioned as infrastructure. Floral oils, animal musks, powdered resins, and scented waters were applied generously and repeatedly. Gloves absorbed fragrance. Hair held it. Bodices carried it from room to room. Furniture participated. The air itself became a collaborator. The goal was not freshness in any modern sense, it was authority. A powerful woman did not need to smell clean, she needed to smell unmistakably expensive. Strong scent announced access, wealth, and distance from ordinary concerns. It discouraged questions, it blurred boundaries. If reality lingered beneath the perfume, it was expected to do so quietly. In this way, fragrance became a form of control, a way to manage perception without addressing cause. And perhaps the most impressive part was how universally this arrangement was accepted. No one asked what lay beneath the jasmine and amber. The agreement was silent, elegant, and mutually beneficial. When scent is strong enough, curiosity learns manners. Clothing reinforced this logic with remarkable efficiency. Royal garments were not designed for bodies, they were designed for messages. Layers of silk, velvet, brocade, fur, and embroidery transformed the wearer into a moving display of lineage and stability. These garments were expensive, delicate, and fundamentally incompatible with regular washing. Water-damaged fibers, soap faded dyes, scrubbing destroyed value. So instead of cleaning clothing, it was managed. Dresses were brushed, aired, perfumed, and rotated. A gown was considered acceptable if it appeared acceptable. What it absorbed beneath the surface was not part of polite consideration. Freshness became a visual category rather than a physical one. If a dress had not been seen recently and did not actively offend the senses, it was doing its job. This was not negligence, it was efficiency within a system that prioritized appearance over reality. Fabric carried memory, but memory was not discussed. It was simply layered over, like everything else. Hair followed the same principle. Natural hair was unpredictable. It thinned, grayed, responded poorly to stress and time. Wigs replaced biology with construction. Elevated, powdered, structured, and rarely dismantled, they presented an idealized form that resisted change. Powder absorbed oil. Shape replaced movement. Control replaced comfort. Over time, wigs became small ecosystems, a fact that was neither shocking nor hidden. It was accommodated. Tools existed for discreet maintenance, designed not to solve the problem but to acknowledge it without disrupting composure. Movements were slow, deliberate, and elegant. Relief, when necessary, was performed as thoughtfulness. Even beauty followed this pattern. Pale skin signaled refinement, a life lived away from labor and weather. Achieving it required substances that delivered immediate results and delayed consequences. Skin suffered quietly, hair weakened, teeth dulled. These effects were reframed as sensitivity, fragility, or constitution, never as cost. Appearance mattered, comfort did not. Endurance, once again, became grace. Even the mouth learned discretion. Sugar consumption increased among elites as access widened, while dental care lagged behind. Smiles narrowed, speech softened. Portraits favored closed lips. What could not be fixed was managed through silence. This pattern extended across daily life. Discomfort was not discussed, it was absorbed. This was not cruelty imposed from above so much as a system sustained by shared expectations. Power allowed substitution. Scent replaced water. Ritual replaced care. Image replaced physical reality. As long as the illusion held, the system functioned. And it held remarkably well. This is not a story about dirt, nor is it an attempt to shock. It is a story about distance. Distance from the body, distance from consequence, distance from the idea that comfort might matter. And at night, when the rituals rest and the perfume thins, the illusion softens just enough to be noticed. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to remind us that beneath the silk and scent, there were bodies doing their best to remain unacknowledged. This story belongs to Europe from the late Middle Ages to the early modern period. Roughly the 14th through 18th centuries, with its strongest emphasis on the 16th to 18th centuries. It does not reach back into antiquity, where bathing culture followed very different traditions, and it does not extend into the 19th century, when modern hygiene began to reshape daily life in more familiar ways. This is a specific historical moment shaped by inherited medical theories, rigid social hierarchies, and the performance of power through appearance. What follows is not an attempt to judge these women by modern standards, nor to reduce their lives to shock value. The aim is to understand the system that made these choices reasonable, even admirable within their context. A world where cleanliness was framed as risk, fragrance as status, and endurance as elegance. We will explore how fashion replaced care, how ritual masked discomfort, and how image was carefully maintained to protect authority. At its core, this is a story about an illusion built from silk, scent, and silence, strong enough to allow power to ignore the body that carried it. Chapter 1: When Cleanliness Became Suspicious. The moment in European history when water felt dangerous, restraint felt intelligent, and avoiding cleanliness quietly became a sign of refinement. Royal women of Europe once lived wrapped in silk, jewels, and unquestioned authority, yet many of them avoided water for years, trusted perfume over cleanliness, and wore dresses that had never been washed. This was not ignorance, neglect, or poverty. It was considered refined, sensible, and quietly superior. Tonight's story is not about dirt. It is about how power learned to look elegant while politely ignoring the body underneath. Night is the best time to talk about things like this. Darkness has a way of softening certainty. Titles feel smaller, certainty loosens its grip. Stories once protected by ceremony and admiration begin to sound different when the lights are low and no one is expected to applaud. In the quiet, history becomes less dramatic and more honest. And honesty, when whispered instead of shouted, is far easier to listen to. In the modern imagination, royal women move through palaces filled with marble bathtubs, warm water, floating flowers, and candlelight. Cleanliness feels automatic in this picture, almost effortless. Of course, they were clean, we assume. They had servants, space, and time. But the past rarely cooperates with modern assumptions, especially when comfort tries to disguise itself as inevitability. There was a long period in European history stretching roughly from the late Middle Ages into the early modern era when bathing was not viewed as virtuous or healthy. It was viewed as risky, not because water was scarce, not because soap was unknown, but because the human body was believed to be fragile in ways we no longer fear. According to medical ideas of the time, warm water relaxed the body too much. Relaxation, in this logic, was dangerous. It softened defenses, opened invisible pathways, and invited illness inside like an unannounced guest who never learned when to leave. The skin was not imagined as armor. It was imagined as a door. And bathing, instead of protecting the body, was thought to hold that door open. So cleanliness became something to approach carefully, thoughtfully, and not too often. Washing too much suggested recklessness. Avoiding water suggested discipline. In this upside-down world, restraint looked intelligent. No one announced this as a rule. There were no official proclamations demanding that royal women avoid bathing. Instead, the habit spread quietly, supported by physicians, reinforced by etiquette, and normalized by repetition. It became one of those shared understandings that no longer required explanation. People simply stopped reaching for water, and over time that choice stopped feeling like a choice at all. Instead of bathing, bodies were managed. Linen cloths wiped what could be seen, undergarments absorbed what they could not, and everything else was left to time, fabric, and discretion. Discomfort was not discussed. Silence performed elegance beautifully. There is something almost impressive about how politely this arrangement held together. No panic, no rebellion, just a calm agreement that certain realities were better handled indirectly. Cleanliness was not rejected. It was postponed indefinitely. And in the quiet logic of power, postponement often looks exactly like control. If water was treated with suspicion, scent was welcomed with open arms. Perfume did not exist as decoration alone. It functioned as infrastructure. Floral oils, animal musks, powdered resins, and scented waters were layered generously, confidently, and repeatedly. Gloves absorbed fragrance, hair held it, bodices carried it from room to room. Even furniture joined the effort, soaking in scent until the air itself felt carefully curated. The purpose was not freshness in any modern sense, it was authority. A powerful woman did not need to smell clean, she needed to smell expensive. Strong scent announced access, wealth, and distance from ordinary concerns. If perfume overwhelmed the senses, it discouraged questions. Curiosity does not thrive in heavy air. It learns to behave. Clothing reinforced this strategy with remarkable efficiency. Royal garments were not designed for comfort or practicality. They were designed to speak. Layers of silk, velvet, brocade, fur, and embroidery transformed the wearer into a walking statement of lineage and stability. These garments were expensive, delicate, and deeply incompatible with regular washing. Water damaged fibers, soap dulled colors, scrubbing destroyed value, so clothing was managed rather than cleaned. Dresses were brushed, aired, perfumed, and rotated. A gown was considered acceptable if it appeared acceptable. Freshness became visual rather than physical. If a dress had not been seen recently and did not actively offend the senses, it had done its job. What it carried beneath the surface was not discussed. Fabric was allowed to remember quietly. Hair followed the same logic. Natural hair was unpredictable. It thinned, grayed, and responded poorly to stress, time, and reality. Wigs replaced biology with construction. Elevated, powdered, structured, and rarely dismantled. They presented an idealized form that resisted change. Powder absorbed oil, shape replaced movement, control replaced comfort. Over time, wigs became small ecosystems, a fact that was neither shocking nor hidden. It was simply accommodated. Tools existed for discreet maintenance designed not to solve the problem, but to acknowledge it without breaking composure. Movements were slow, thoughtful, and elegant. Relief, when necessary, was performed as contemplation. Nothing ruins authority faster than visible humanity. Beauty itself required endurance. Pale skin signaled refinement, suggesting a life lived away from labor and weather. Achieving it required substances that delivered immediate visual success and long-term consequences. Skin suffered quietly, hair weakened, teeth dulled. These effects were reframed as sensitivity or constitution, never as cost. Appearance mattered. Comfort did not. Endurance became grace. To suffer quietly was to be elegant. To complain would suggest awareness of the body, and awareness was unnecessary when illusion was functioning properly. In this world, nothing was accidental. Every layer, scent, and silence worked together to maintain distance between image and reality. And remarkably, it worked. As long as no one asked what lay beneath the silk and scent, the system remained intact, calm, and very convincing. Even the mouth learned discretion. As access to sugar increased among elites, dental care lagged behind. Smiles grew smaller, speech softened, portraits favored closed lips. What could not be fixed was managed through silence. A visible problem became a private one. Silence once again performed elegance beautifully. This pattern extended across daily life. Discomfort was not discussed, it was absorbed. This was not cruelty imposed from above so much as a system sustained by shared expectations. Power allowed substitution. Scent replaced water. Ritual replaced care. Image replaced physical reality. As long as the illusion held, the system functioned, and it held remarkably well. This is not a story about filth, and it is not an attempt to shock. It is a story about distance. Distance from the body. Distance from consequence. Distance from the idea that comfort might matter. It is a story about how authority learns to look effortless by hiding the effort somewhere else, usually beneath layers of fabric and habit. What makes this history unsettling is not how different it is from the present, but how familiar its logic remains. When image is rewarded, maintenance becomes optional. When appearance is protected, discomfort becomes invisible. The system does not require cruelty to function. It only requires agreement. At night, when the rituals rest and the perfume thins, the illusion softens just enough to be noticed. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to remind us that beneath the silk and scent were bodies doing their best to remain unacknowledged. Bodies that breathed, ached, endured, and waited patiently for morning. This story belongs to Europe from the late Middle Ages to the early modern period, roughly the 14th through 18th centuries, with its strongest focus on the 16th to 18th centuries. It does not reach back into antiquity, where bathing culture followed different traditions, and it does not extend into the 19th century, when modern hygiene slowly reshaped daily life. This is a specific historical moment shaped by inherited medical ideas, rigid hierarchies, and the performance of power through appearance. What follows beyond this quiet opening is not judgment, it is observation. A slow walk through a world where cleanliness was framed as risk, fragrance as status, and endurance as elegance. A world that believed looking noble mattered more than feeling human. And perhaps that is the most restful thought to carry into sleep. Not that the past was strange, but that it was calm, carefully arranged, softly lit, and deeply committed to the illusion that everything was fine as long as no one disturbed it. Chapter 2: Perfume. The Art of Hiding the Truth. When the air became the answer, when the body could no longer be trusted with water, attention slowly drifted elsewhere. Not downward toward the skin and not inward toward health, but outward into the space between people. The air became the safest place to intervene. It could be changed without risk, adjusted without consequence, and shaped without ever touching the body itself. This was not a desperate decision. It was calm, methodical, and widely accepted. In early modern European courts, avoiding water did not signal neglect. It suggested caution. Warm baths were believed to soften the body's defenses, to open invisible passages through which illness might wander in uninvited. Cleanliness, in that logic, was not comfort. It was exposure. So the solution was not to wash, but to surround. If the body could not be cleansed, the environment could be managed instead. And this management became remarkably sophisticated. Perfume was no longer a finishing touch, it became structure. Fragrance was applied with intention and repetition. Hair absorbed scented oils until movement itself carried aroma. Gloves were soaked until they released perfume long after hands had departed. Dresses accepted layer after layer of scent, not as decoration, but as insurance. Even furniture participated. Chairs, curtains, cushions, and bed frames were treated as quietly as skin, asked to hold scent and release it slowly, steadily, without interruption. There were rooms in palaces where the air felt dense, almost textured. You did not step into them so much as enter an agreement. Breathing slowed, thoughts softened. The scent did not announce itself loudly. It settled, confident and unquestioned. Perfume did not claim cleanliness. It suggested resolution. It said that whatever might have required attention had already been addressed, and that no further inquiry was necessary. In this way, scent became conversational. It spoke gently but firmly. There is nothing here that needs examining. This was deeply reassuring. It relieved everyone involved of responsibility. No one needed to ask about the body beneath the fabric. No one needed to wonder how comfort was achieved. The air carried the burden instead, performing calm on behalf of everyone present. There was something almost intimate about this arrangement. It required trust. Trust that scent could stand in for care. Trust that atmosphere could replace maintenance. Trust that what could not be safely touched could be politely ignored. And so people learned to live slightly above the body, floating in fragrance, guided by routine. The body remained private, protected by silence. Public life unfolded in scent and fabric, where risk felt distant and manageable. It was not illusion in the dramatic sense, it was habit. And habits, when repeated gently enough, eventually feel like truth. Scent as status, scent as distance. Over time, perfume stopped behaving like a solution and began acting like a language. It communicated rank, distance, and intention without requiring explanation. In royal spaces, scent replaced proximity. One did not lean closer. The air arrived first, carrying instruction in advance. The stronger and rarer the fragrance, the greater the distance it created. Imported resins, animal musks, and flower oils traveled farther than their wearers ever would. To smell richly perfumed was to announce access to trade, wealth, and patience. It took time to acquire these ingredients, and time itself was a form of power. A royal woman rarely entered a room unnoticed. Her presence was preceded by aroma, settling into fabric, corners, and breath. By the time she appeared, the space had already adjusted. Backs straightened, conversations softened. Authority had been inhaled before it was seen. This transformation of presence into atmosphere gently removed the body from the exchange. Skin was no longer the point. Breath became irrelevant. Interaction occurred at the level of impression rather than contact. Perfume allowed power to remain untouched. There is a mild irony here. Fragrance, intended to conceal, became the most memorable feature of all. Yet it was preferred. Overwhelm was easier than inspection. Inhalation required no questions. Acceptance followed naturally. As years passed, noses adapted, expectations shifted. What once might have felt excessive came to feel reassuring. A heavily scented room signaled order and continuity. It promised that nothing unexpected would intrude, and that promise mattered more than accuracy. Maintaining this illusion required constant, careful labor. Bottles were refilled, powders refreshed, oils warmed, fabrics reworked. Servants moved quietly through rooms, adjusting the invisible structure of scent. The work itself remained unacknowledged. To notice it would have fractured the calm. Perfume also protected emotional distance. It discouraged closeness without refusing it. Conversations stayed polite, gestures restrained. Scent became a boundary more effective than walls, keeping bodies present but inaccessible. In this way, fragrance functioned as etiquette. It regulated behavior, softened curiosity, and stabilized hierarchy. Power did not need to announce itself loudly. It simply needed to linger. Eventually, perfume ceased to feel deliberate. It became expected. Tradition absorbed intention. People no longer remembered why the air was so heavy. They only knew it should be. Systems last longest when they feel natural. When explanation fades, habit remains. The scented air carried memory quietly, preserving a way of living that asked very little of those it favored. Within this atmosphere, endurance became elegance. To remain composed beneath layers of fragrance and fabric was admired. Discomfort, if it existed, was swallowed gently and without comment. The arrangement worked because it felt calm. No one hurried, no one objected. The air held everything in place, steady and unquestioned, allowing power to rest comfortably above the body it preferred not to notice. At night, when lamps dimmed and voices softened, the scented rooms grew even quieter. Perfume mixed with warmth, fabric, and breath, creating a gentle haze that encouraged stillness. In that stillness, questions lost their urgency. What mattered was continuity, not correction. The system asked only for patience and participation. And so it endured, not through force, but through comfort, repetition, and the promise that everything already was exactly as it should be. It settled like a habit learned slowly, reinforced daily and rarely examined, allowing those within it to drift gently forward without resistance, curiosity, or the slightest need to disturb what felt orderly, elegant, and safely beyond the reach of touch. Nothing demanded change, and nothing invited scrutiny, so the air continued doing its quiet work, endlessly around everyone night after night there. When no one asked anymore. At some point, perfume stopped feeling like a choice and began to feel like air itself. It no longer answered a problem. It simply existed. The question it had once addressed quietly disappeared, and in its place remained routine, expectation, and comfort. No one remembered when scent became essential. They only knew that without it, something felt wrong. This is how systems succeed. They outlive their reasons. In royal life, fragrance no longer signaled intention. It signaled normality. To be surrounded by heavy scent was not remarkable. It was reassuring. It meant the order of things remained intact. It meant nothing had shifted unexpectedly beneath the surface. The air, thick and familiar, held everything steady. Within this atmosphere, endurance was quietly praised. To remain composed beneath layers of fabric, powder, and perfume was considered grace. Discomfort, if present, was not discussed. Silence itself became evidence of refinement. One did not complain. One adapted. Adaptation was elegance. There is something gently unsettling about how peaceful this arrangement felt. No urgency pressed in. No correction was demanded. The body, left unattended, faded from public concern. It existed privately beyond conversation while its social presence drifted calmly through rooms in scented form. Power rarely announces itself through force alone. More often it settles into habit. In this case, it settled into the air. It softened curiosity. It slowed inspection. It encouraged acceptance. When everything smelled as it should, there was no reason to look further. Over time, even the labor behind the scent vanished from awareness. Oils were blended, fabrics refreshed, rooms prepared. But the effort remained invisible. To notice it would have disturbed the calm, and calm was valued above accuracy. Perfume did not create illusion in the dramatic sense. It created comfort. Comfort discouraged questions, and without questions, systems remain undisturbed. As night approached in these palaces, scent deepened, lamps dimmed, fabric absorbed warmth. The air grew heavier, slower, more enveloping. Voices lowered naturally, movements softened. The scented environment encouraged stillness, not because it demanded it, but because it made stillness feel appropriate. Sleep arrived easily in such spaces, wrapped in fragrance, cushioned by silence, guarded carefully from the inconvenient reminders of the body. In sleep, the illusion no longer required maintenance, it simply continued. And perhaps that is the quiet conclusion of this chapter. Not that perfume replaced cleanliness, but that it replaced attention. It allowed life to move forward without interruption, without confrontation, and without the need to acknowledge what lay beneath appearances. This was not deception imposed from above. It was cooperation sustained from within. Everyone participated. Everyone benefited, at least on the surface. The air carried the agreement gently, night after night. In this way, perfume became more than scent. It became permission. Permission not to ask. Permission not to notice. Permission to let the body remain somewhere else, while public life unfolded smoothly above it. And so the scented world endured, calm and orderly. Not because it was true, but because it felt complete. Nothing seemed missing. Nothing asked to be corrected. As the night grows quieter, as thoughts loosen and attention drifts, it becomes easier to understand why this arrangement lasted so long. It did not disturb. It did not challenge. It invited rest. The air held everything in place, softly, patiently, allowing power to remain composed, elegant, and comfortably untouched, drifting forward through time without resistance, wrapped always in the reassuring belief that what could not be safely addressed did not need to be addressed at all, ever again, here. Chapter 3. Clothes too expensive to be washed. Fabric that collected time. Royal garments were not dirty in the ordinary sense of the word. They did not gather mud or sweat in obvious ways. Instead, they accumulated time. A gown could witness more banquets than a single body ever would, absorbing evenings, seasons, and expectations without complaint. It did not age the way people did. It simply became heavier, with memory. These dresses were not meant to be cleaned, not because no one thought of it, but because washing was considered far more dangerous than leaving things as they were. Water threatened fabric, soap threatened color, scrubbing threatened structure, and structure once lost could not be replaced. A single gown might cost more than a house. It might represent months of labor, imported silk, rare dyes, and careful stitching. To place such an object into water would have felt reckless. So gowns were preserved, not refreshed. They were worn, rested, and worn again. They passed through rooms, ceremonies, and conversations, quietly holding on to what they encountered. Perfume layered itself gently into the fabric. Smoke settled into seams. The warmth of bodies lingered long after bodies had moved on. The most common solution when freshness was required was air. Dresses were hung near open windows, where breezes were invited to perform their quiet work. Wind, it was hoped, would carry away whatever needed carrying away. If it did not, one waited longer. Patience, after all, was free. And if patience failed, fragrance assisted. This was freshness based largely on belief. A gown that had rested in moving air was considered renewed. A dress touched by perfume was understood to have improved. No one needed proof. Proof would have been inconvenient. Layers complicated everything. Royal women wore chemises, petticoats, stays, corsets, overskirts, and trains, each one touching the next. These layers absorbed and transferred traces of life, creating a quiet exchange between fabric and fabric. Washing one layer without the others accomplished little. Washing all of them was unthinkable. Instead, garments were rotated, not to improve hygiene, but to avoid repetition. A woman might own dozens of dresses, not because she wished to be clean, but because she wished to be seen as endlessly new. Freshness was visual, not physical. There is something almost poetic in this arrangement. Clothing became a record rather than a barrier. It remembered where the body had been, what the room had smelled like, how long the night had lasted. The dress held these details patiently, never asked to release them. In this way, fabric replaced skin. It became the surface that society interacted with. What lay beneath remained secondary, shielded by layers too valuable to disturb. And so the gowns endured, hung carefully, aired gently, scented thoughtfully, trusted to hold time without complaint. They did not need to be clean, they needed only to remain intact. Maintenance without cleaning. When clothing could not be washed, it had to be managed. Royal wardrobes became systems of rotation, rest, and careful avoidance. A gown was never retired because it was unclean, only because it had been seen too recently. Visibility, not wear, determined value. Dresses rested between appearances, hanging quietly in darkened rooms where time slowed. This pause was considered sufficient. Fabric, left undisturbed, was believed to recover on its own. The absence of action was interpreted as care. In stillness, garments were thought to settle, releasing whatever excess life they carried without intervention. Nothing further was expected of them then. Rotation replaced washing as the primary form of maintenance. Linen layers closest to the body were sometimes changed, though rarely cleaned in any modern sense. Even these were aired, not scrubbed. Outer garments, heavier and more complex, were treated almost as furniture. They belonged to the room as much as to the wearer. If a dress appeared intact, it was considered successful. Stains were not emergencies. Odor was not discussed. Silence performed preservation better than attention ever could. Time itself was trusted to smooth everything quietly, while belief completed the remaining work unseen, without witnesses or objections from anyone present. Because garments were rarely washed, they became archives. Each wear added a thin layer of memory, invisible but persistent. Smoke from candles, warmth from bodies, and traces of rooms all settled into seams. Over years, a single gown could carry dozens of evenings within it. This accumulation was not considered a flaw. It was continuity. To wear such fabric was to step into a history already formed, one that did not require explanation. Washing would have erased that story entirely, and stories mattered, especially stories stitched slowly by wealth and repetition that no one questioned aloud during long ceremonial years. Freshness in this world was visual. A dress looked new if it had not been seen. It felt renewed if it moved differently under candlelight. The body beneath it mattered far less than the surface presented. This separation allowed appearances to function independently from physical reality. Fabric performed health. Layers suggested order. And everyone agreed not to ask what maintenance truly meant. Belief filled the remaining space gently and without resistance. It was easier to admire silk than confront biology directly. Elegance thrived wherever questions learned to fall asleep behind velvet folds and polite smiles that never demanded explanation again. Because garments were costly, they were respected in ways bodies were not. Fabric received patience, skin received endurance. This quiet trade shaped daily life. Women learned to inhabit clothing carefully, minimizing strain, avoiding unnecessary movement, preserving structure. Comfort was secondary. Stability mattered more. A gown that held its form was successful, regardless of what it concealed. Clothing became a shared priority, while the body adapted privately, out of view. This arrangement felt reasonable inside its own logic. Everyone played their role with practiced calm. Nothing appeared broken enough to justify change, especially when appearances remained beautifully intact, under constant observation. By the time these garments finally failed, fashions had shifted. New silhouettes replaced old ones, not because hygiene demanded it, but because novelty did. The cycle continued smoothly. Dresses aged out of relevance before they aged materially. In this rhythm, washing was unnecessary. Time itself performed the erasure. Clothing disappeared quietly, leaving behind the belief that nothing unpleasant had ever been present at all. Memory softened as fabric passed out of sight. Replacement felt cleaner than maintenance ever could. And so the pattern repeated without reflection, calmly reinforcing habits that required no reconsideration from those benefiting most within silent rooms. When fabric replaced the body, eventually clothing stopped being something that required attention and became something that demanded faith. If a gown remained whole, if its seams held and its shape endured, then it was considered well. Cleanliness was no longer part of the evaluation. Integrity was. Fabric that survived time was trusted, regardless of what it carried within its layers. This trust shaped behavior quietly. Movements slowed, gestures shortened. Women learned to exist within their clothes rather than alongside them. A body was adjusted to preserve fabric, not the other way around. Sitting was careful. Standing was rehearsed. Comfort was negotiated privately and rarely discussed. Endurance once again became a measure of refinement. There is a gentle irony here. Clothing designed to protect the body gradually required protection from the body instead. Perspiration, friction, and warmth became threats. The solution was distance. Layers separated skin from silk. Linen absorbed what it could. Everything else was left to air and patience. When dresses were removed at night, they were not inspected. They were released, hung carefully, smoothed, allowed to rest. Darkness completed the ritual. In still rooms, fabric loosened slightly as if exhaling. Whatever remained was accepted without judgment. Over time, this arrangement felt natural. The absence of washing no longer registered as absence. It was simply how things were done. To question it would have required imagining alternatives, and alternatives belong to other worlds. Worlds without silk, without servants, without the quiet confidence that nothing truly needed changing. Clothing carried authority because it outlasted individuals. A gown might be worn by multiple women across generations. It moved between bodies without ever fully belonging to one. In that way, it became more permanent than flesh. Fabric endured. People passed through it briefly. This endurance softened responsibility. If garments were stable, then systems were stable. If appearances held, then order remained. Physical reality could fluctuate quietly underneath without disturbing the surface. Society interacted with cloth, not skin. At night, as candles burned low and the weight of fabric finally lifted, the body returned briefly. It breathed, stretched, remembered itself. But this reunion was temporary. Morning restored layers, structure, and expectation. The dress resumed its role as intermediary between body and world. And perhaps this is the quiet conclusion of the chapter. Clothing did not simply cover the body, it replaced it in public life. It allowed society to function without acknowledging the physical cost of elegance. Silk absorbed attention. Velvet held silence. Nothing was openly denied. It was simply redirected. Time, scent, and fabric worked together to maintain the illusion that maintenance was unnecessary, that preservation could occur without disturbance. That value resided in what remained visible. As sleep deepens and thought drifts, it becomes easier to understand why this felt sufficient. The system did not demand effort, only compliance. And compliance, wrapped in beauty and routine, felt gentle. The dresses remained, the bodies adapted, and the air carrying both fabric and silence allowed everything to continue without interruption, night after night, exactly as expected. It asked for nothing dramatic, only consistency, and consistency was easy to supply. Each day repeated the last with minor adjustments, none of them urgent enough to provoke change. The wardrobe closed quietly, the room settled, and the system rested. In that rest, questions softened into habits. Habits became tradition. Tradition became comfort. And comfort, once established, rarely invites revision, especially when it arrives dressed beautifully, moves silently, and asks nothing more than to be believed, patiently, without inspection, without interruption, and without the slightest need to look beneath the surface ever again, while sleep carries everything forward, gently, endlessly, on. Chapter 4: Hair that Required Architecture. When convenience lost its value. Wigs were never designed to be convenient. They were designed to demonstrate that convenience was irrelevant. In the royal courts of early modern Europe, hair stopped being something that grew naturally and became something that was constructed. Height mattered. Complexity mattered. distance from water mattered most of all. The further hair moved away from the body, the safer it felt. Natural hair was unpredictable. It required washing. It reacted to heat, sweat, and weather. Wigs solved this problem by replacing biology with design. Hair could now be assembled, shaped, and preserved according to taste rather than need. It could be powdered, pinned, lifted, and expanded into something that no longer belonged to the body at all. Powder served many purposes. It whitened hair, aligning appearance with fashionable ideals of refinement, but more quietly, it absorbed oil, it managed shine, it softened signs of life. Powder dulled whatever reminded the viewer that hair grew from skin. Over time, layers of powder accumulated, turning wigs into pale structures that resisted touch and discouraged closeness. As wigs grew taller and more elaborate, they moved further from water by necessity. Washing them would have required dismantling entire constructions. Pins, frames, padding, and curls worked together like scaffolding. Removing them regularly would have undone hours of labor and disrupted carefully maintained shapes. So wigs were preserved rather than cleaned. They were rested, not refreshed. Gradually, wigs stopped being accessories and became environments. They held heat, they trapped powder, they created warmth and darkness near the scalp. Small lives noticed. Lice arrived quietly and stayed. Their presence was not celebrated, but it was acknowledged without urgency. This was not considered a failure. It was an inconvenience folded gently into routine. The solution was not removal, it was adaptation. And adaptation, as always, was made elegant. Lice sticks appeared as refined tools, long and slender, often jeweled or carved. They allowed scratching without disruption. An intensely private act was transformed into a public gesture. One scratched slowly, thoughtfully, as if distracted by matters of state. The motion was controlled. The expression remained neutral. Relief, if achieved, was never acknowledged. This ritual accomplished several things at once. It maintained composure, it preserved the wig, and it signaled belonging. Knowing how to scratch correctly mattered. Too quickly suggested desperation. Too aggressively suggested loss of control. Grace was measured in restraint, even here. There is something quietly humorous in this transformation, a biological irritation elevated into etiquette, a physical necessity translated into performance. But humor, like discomfort, was absorbed without comment. Wigs continued to rise, powder continued to settle, ritual replaced response. The body adjusted again, as it always did, while architecture took its place above the scalp. Hair no longer framed the face. It defined distance, and distance, carefully maintained, remained the clearest sign that nothing about this life was meant to be easy. The ritual of maintenance without removal. Once wigs became permanent fixtures rather than daily accessories, maintenance learned to adapt. Removal was disruptive. It required time, privacy, and assistance. It risked collapse, so wigs stayed on. Days passed, nights passed, and the structures remained in place, absorbing whatever life occurred beneath them. Care no longer meant cleaning. It meant preservation. Powder was reapplied, pins were tightened, loose strands were corrected gently without disturbing the whole. The goal was not renewal, but continuity. As long as the form held, the system was considered successful. Sleeping with wigs became common, not because it was comfortable, but because it was efficient. To dismantle a construction at night only to rebuild it in the morning seemed unnecessary. The neck learned to tolerate weight. The scalp learned to accept warmth. Discomfort was absorbed quietly, framed as discipline rather than inconvenience. Over time, the wig ceased to be something worn and became something inhabited. It developed its own internal climate. Heat collected, powder thickened. The scalp disappeared from conversation. What mattered was silhouette. This arrangement encouraged distance. One did not touch another's hair casually. One did not lean too closely. The height and complexity of wigs enforced space without requiring instruction. They functioned as boundaries as much as adornment. Maintenance rituals became social knowledge. One learned when to repowder, how to adjust balance, how to respond if something shifted unexpectedly. Calm mattered more than correction. A slight tilt was addressed subtly. Panic was unacceptable. There is a quiet elegance in how effort was hidden. Hours of labor vanished behind the appearance of effortlessness. Servants worked patiently, often before dawn, restoring symmetry and stability. The result was not freshness, but reliability. Reliability was prized. Powder continued to perform its silent labor. It absorbed oil, dulled shine, softened movement. It also muted smell. What it could not remove, it disguised. Over time, layers accumulated, turning wigs into pale monuments that resisted change. Biology adapted again. Lice remained part of the environment. They were managed, not eliminated. Scratching tools stayed within reach. The act was integrated into conversation, into listening, into moments of apparent reflection. Relief arrived quietly, if at all. This normalization is perhaps the most telling detail. Nothing was dramatic. Nothing required intervention. The system accommodated discomfort without acknowledging it. Acceptance replaced solution. Hair, once a sign of vitality, became a sign of control. The further it moved from natural behavior, the more successful it was considered. Height suggested authority. Complexity suggested patience. Distance from water suggested wisdom. At some point, the question of why ceased entirely. Wigs were not discussed. They were expected. To imagine life without them felt strange, even improper. Alternatives belonged to lesser worlds, worlds without time or resources to maintain such elaborate structures. And so the ritual continued. Powder settled, pins held, heads remained upright. Architecture stayed balanced above the body, requiring cooperation rather than comfort. The wig did not need to feel good. It needed to remain. And remaining in this system was everything. When the head became a stage, eventually wigs stopped being noticed as objects and began to be accepted as conditions. They were no longer questioned, adjusted, or discussed beyond practical necessity. They existed the way ceilings existed. You did not think about them unless something went wrong, and ideally, nothing ever did. By this point, hair had fully left the realm of the personal. It was no longer an extension of the body, but a signal to the world. Height suggested authority. Balance suggested discipline. Complexity suggested time, patience, and resources. The wig spoke before its wearer ever did. The head became a stage, carefully arranged and carefully maintained. Movement slowed to accommodate structure. Gestures adapted. Even laughter softened. The architecture above the scalp influenced behavior below it, shaping posture and pace without instruction. This influence was subtle but constant. One learned to sit, differently, to turn carefully, to sleep lightly. The body learned to negotiate with the construction it carried. This negotiation was private and ongoing. In public, effort disappeared. There is a quiet irony in how much labor was required to appear effortless. Hours of preparation vanished behind a composed silhouette. The wig stood firm, calm, untroubled by the life beneath it, and that calm was admired. Discomfort, when it appeared, was absorbed into routine. It was not dramatic. It did not demand sympathy. It simply existed, acknowledged only through habit. A scratch performed slowly, a shift disguised as thought. Relief, if found, remained unspoken. In this way, even irritation became performance. The lice stick, once a tool, became a gesture. To scratch was not to break composure, but to demonstrate mastery over it. One could attend to the body while appearing to contemplate politics, alliances, or nothing at all. Over time, this performance became natural. Children grew up watching it. They learned the movements, the pauses, the rhythm of elegance. What once might have seemed absurd became simply correct. Architecture belonged on the head, the body belonged underneath it. The wig did not promise comfort, it promised distance. Distance from nature, distance from unpredictability, distance from water, from sweat, from anything that reminded the observer that the body was still present. And so the head remained elevated, literally and symbolically. Power rested higher. The face appeared calmer. The system reinforced itself quietly, day after day, without argument. At night, when wigs were finally removed or loosened, the body returned briefly to itself. The scalp breathed. The neck rested. But this reunion was temporary. Morning restored height, powder, and expectation. By then, the architecture felt familiar, necessary, even reassuring. To imagine appearing without it felt improper, unfinished, naked almost. And perhaps that is the final shape of this chapter. Hair became structure, structure became identity, and identity, once stabilized, required no further explanation. The wig stood in place, the body adjusted beneath it, and society, satisfied with the arrangement, looked no further, content to admire what rose above the head, while gently forgetting everything that supported it. Night after quiet night, drifting forward without interruption, carried by habit, patience, and the soft belief that elegance was simply what remained visible. Chapter 5. Beauty that hurt. Quietly. Pale skin and patient silence. White skin was never a natural gift. It was cultivated slowly, patiently, and with remarkable disregard for consequence. In candlelit rooms, pale faces glowed softly, reflecting refinement, leisure, and control. What the light revealed, however, was only the surface, and surfaces were all that mattered. Beauty in royal Europe learned early to value appearance over outcome. Powders were mixed carefully, applied generously, and trusted completely. White pigments promised purity. Vinegar tightened skin. Lead brightened tone. Each ingredient carried reassurance, and each quietly demanded payment later. The exchange was never described as dangerous. It was described as delicate. Preparation became ritual. Faces were cleansed lightly, never thoroughly, then layered with substances meant to correct nature. The goal was not health, it was uniformity. A pale face suggested distance from labor, sun, and ordinary life. Color implied exposure. Exposure implied vulnerability. Vulnerability did not belong at court. Under candlelight, these mixtures performed beautifully. Skin appeared smooth, calm, untouched by time. Shadows softened imperfections. Reflection replaced reality. Compliments followed. Silence completed the arrangement. The body, meanwhile, adapted quietly. Irritation appeared first, then fatigue, then small changes that were explained away gently. Redness became sensitivity. Weakness became temperament. Illness became constitution. Language softened what substances hardened. No one framed this as harm. Harm suggested error. Error suggested correction. Instead, discomfort was reclassified as personal variation. Some bodies, it was said, were simply more sensitive than others. This explanation preserved the practice while absolving it of responsibility. There was patience in this process. Results were not immediate. Consequences unfolded slowly, politely, over years. That slowness made them easier to ignore. Nothing dramatic interrupted the routine. No moment demanded reconsideration. Servants prepared mixtures daily, handling powders with practiced care. They knew the formulas, the proportions, the gestures. Their hands moved calmly. The work felt normal. Repetition erased doubt. Beauty required endurance. The face learned to remain still beneath layers of correction. Expression softened, movement slowed. A composed appearance mattered more than comfort. Control became visible virtue. There is quiet irony here. The pursuit of an unchanging surface demanded continuous effort. Stillness required constant intervention. What appeared effortless was sustained carefully, day after day. At night, when makeup was partially removed, the skin breathed briefly. But removal was never complete. Too much scrubbing risked damage. Too much attention invited awareness. Morning restored the familiar mask. Over time, the mask felt natural. To appear without it felt unfinished, almost improper. The body learned to accept discomfort as part of elegance. This was not cruelty imposed from above. It was cooperation maintained gently. Everyone involved understood the goal. Pale skin meant belonging. Belonging justified patience. And so the face continued to glow under candlelight, admired for what it suggested rather than what it cost, while the body adjusted silently beneath. Learning again that beauty, when valued above consequence, rarely announces the pain it carries. These practices persisted because they were framed as refinement rather than risk. Candlelight rewarded the illusion generously, forgiving texture, smoothing color, and turning powder into promise. The mirror, consulted briefly, confirmed success and discouraged doubt. What mattered was how beauty functioned socially, not how it behaved biologically. Consequence arrived slowly, politely, and alone. By the time effects could no longer be ignored, fashions had shifted, and explanations were ready. Sensitive constitution, weak humors, unfortunate disposition. Language adjusted again. The routine continued, calm and unquestioned. In this quiet persistence, pain did not vanish, but it remained private, softened by habit and admiration, carried gently into sleep, where discomfort blurred into background sensation, never loud enough to interrupt the belief that elegance was worth the cost there. When damage was called delicacy. As time passed, the effects of these beauty practices became harder to ignore, yet easier to rename. Skin cracked, peeled, and thinned beneath layers of powder and paste. Teeth loosened, hair weakened, fatigue settled into bones. None of this was described as danger. Danger would have implied urgency. Instead, the language softened everything. A woman was said to have a sensitive constitution. Another was described as naturally fragile. Weakness was framed as refinement. Discomfort was translated into temperament. This vocabulary mattered. It allowed the routine to continue without interruption, without guilt, and without the need to change. Beauty manuals did not warn, they reassured. If irritation appeared, one adjusted proportions. If illness followed, one rested briefly. The solution was never removal. It was moderation. Less powder, a gentler vinegar, a different blend. The system adapted just enough to preserve itself. Candlelight remained forgiving. It hid texture. It softened unevenness. It rewarded patience. In its glow, faces still appeared luminous, untouched by effort. Compliments arrived. Approval followed. The social function of beauty remained intact, and that function outweighed private discomfort. Pain, when it arrived slowly. It did not interrupt court life. It did not disrupt ceremony. It existed in quiet moments late at night or early in the morning, before preparation began again. These moments were personal, not political, and so they remained unspoken. There is a particular calm in how harm was absorbed. Nothing dramatic occurred, no sudden collapse demanded attention. Instead, bodies adapted gradually, learning to function under strain. Adaptation was praised as resilience. Resilience was admired. Servants noticed changes long before anyone else. They prepared mixtures daily. They applied powders carefully. They saw irritation form and fade. Their role was not to question, but to assist. Assistance replaced inquiry. Routine replaced reflection. In this environment, stopping would have required explanation. Explanation would have required admitting risk, and risk would have unsettled the illusion. So the process continued, softened by language and habit. Beauty, after all, was not judged by longevity. It was judged by appearance in the moment. If the face glowed tonight, tomorrow mattered less. Time was fragmented into present impressions. Long-term consequence had no audience. There is quiet irony in this. The pursuit of permanence relied on substances that undermined it. Pale skin suggested timelessness, yet required constant intervention that slowly weakened the body producing it. Still, the contradiction remained comfortably out of focus. Women learned to manage symptoms privately. A headache became restlessness. Dizziness became mood. Illness became disposition. None of these terms threatened the practice itself. They individualized consequence, protecting the system. By the time damage became undeniable, explanations were already prepared. Some bodies were simply more sensitive, some constitutions were weaker. This reasoning preserved the ideal while sacrificing the individual quietly. Nothing about this felt cruel to those inside it. It felt normal. It felt expected. The price of beauty was not discussed as price. It was discussed as character. And so the face continued to be prepared each day, layered carefully, admired briefly, and left behind at night. Pain remained present, but polite. Never loud enough to disrupt ceremony, never urgent enough to demand change. In this way, beauty hurt quietly. Not as a shock, but as a background condition. A constant, manageable presence. It was carried with composure, softened by compliments, and eased into sleep where discomfort blurred gently into sensation, never sharp enough to break the belief that elegance, once established, was simply how things were meant to feel, accepted without argument, night after night. The cost that never spoke its name. Eventually, the effects of beauty no longer appeared as isolated discomforts, but as a constant undertone of life. The body learned to function while carrying them, the way one learns to walk with weight that never leaves. Nothing dramatic marked this shift. There was no moment of realization. The change was gradual, polite, and therefore easy to accept. Skin thinned slowly, sensation dulled in some places and sharpened in others. Fatigue became familiar. These changes did not interrupt daily routines. They existed alongside them, folded neatly into habit. Preparation continued. Powder was applied. Candlelight did its work. Admiration followed as expected. What mattered was that beauty still functioned. It still communicated refinement, distance, and control. The system judged success by surface response, not internal condition. As long as the mirror reflected approval, the body's private objections carried little weight. There is something deeply unsettling in how effectively language protected this arrangement. Pain did not disappear. It was reclassified. Illness became sensitivity. Weakness became temperament. Decline became constitution. Each word softened consequence, allowing it to remain personal rather than structural. This personalization mattered. It ensured that responsibility rested with the body, not the practice. If someone suffered, it was unfortunate but not instructive. The ideal remained intact. Only individuals varied in their ability to endure it. Over time, this expectation of endurance became a form of beauty itself. To suffer quietly was admired. To maintain composure despite discomfort suggested strength. Strength suggested worthiness. The cycle reinforced itself gently. At night, when preparation ended and rooms grew still, the body was briefly alone with itself. Makeup was loosened but not fully removed. Skin breathed cautiously. Muscles relaxed slightly. Relief was partial. Complete release would have required confronting damage, and confrontation belonged to daylight, not rest. Sleep arrived as negotiation. The body rested where it could, holding discomfort at the edges of awareness. Dreams softened sensation. Morning restored routine before reflection could form. In this rhythm, pain never accumulated enough urgency to demand change. It is tempting to view this history as ignorance, but ignorance implies absence of knowledge. What existed instead was prioritization. Appearance mattered more than outcome. The present moment mattered more than duration. The cost was known but distant, spread thinly across time. Beauty asked for patience, and patience was plentiful. It asked for silence, and silence was rewarded. It did not ask for health. Health was optional. This arrangement endured because it felt calm. Nothing forced reconsideration. No single moment demanded correction. The system did not collapse, it simply continued. And perhaps this is the quiet truth at the center of this chapter. Beauty did not wound loudly. It did not announce harm. It asked for cooperation, and cooperation was given freely, wrapped in admiration and habit. As night deepens and thought slows, it becomes easier to understand how such practices lasted for generations. They did not feel violent, they felt elegant. They did not disrupt life, they organized it. The face glowed under candlelight. The body adapted beneath. Language softened everything else. And in that softness, consequence lost its urgency, drifting into the background like a distant ache, never sharp enough to interrupt the belief that what was admired must also be worth enduring. Sleep settles gently over this world, carrying both beauty and its cost forward together, inseparable, unquestioned, and quiet, resting easily inside a system that never asked pain to explain itself, only to remain manageable, discreet, and endlessly patient. Beneath the surface, night after night, as elegance continued to glow, untouched above it all. Chapter 6: Teeth, Silence, and the Closed Smile. Sweetness and what it cost. Sugar arrived in royal Europe as a symbol of privilege long before it arrived as a problem. It traveled far, cost dearly, and appeared first on the tables of those whose status allowed indulgence without explanation. To consume sugar was to demonstrate access. To offer it was to display wealth. No one spoke of restraint. Restraint belonged to those without choice. The body, however, did not recognize sugar as symbolism. Teeth responded first, slowly, quietly, without ceremony. There was no concept of dental care as we understand it today. Teeth were not brushed, they were not protected, they were endured. Pain emerged gradually, a dull ache at first, then sensitivity, then absence. Teeth loosened, gums retreated. These changes did not interrupt daily life. They were absorbed into routine the same way other discomforts had been absorbed before. Solutions were practical rather than corrective. Food softened, bread was soaked, meat was stewed. Chewing became careful. Preference adjusted quietly. What could not be comfortably eaten simply disappeared from personal menus. No announcement was required. Speech adapted as well. Words were chosen thoughtfully. Laughter shortened. Conversation slowed. Silence, already valued, became useful. A closed mouth suggested composure. It also suggested discretion. In this context, discretion was elegance. A wide smile, especially one revealing teeth, was not admired. It was considered excessive, uncontrolled, even vulgar. Refinement favored restraint. Lips remained closed, expression softened. The face learned to communicate without revealing what lay behind it. There is a quiet convenience in this standard. When teeth failed, fashion adjusted. When pain persisted, etiquette absorbed it. The ideal of elegance offered cover. One did not need to explain discomfort. One simply smiled differently. Sugar continued to circulate. Sweets appeared at banquets. Confections decorated tables. Pleasure remained visible, even as its cost became invisible. Teeth disappeared quietly, one by one, without altering ceremony. Language softened consequence again. Dental decay was not described as damage, it was described as misfortune. Some mouths were said to be weaker, some constitutions more delicate. Responsibility shifted gently from habit to body. Servants noticed. They prepared softer foods. They adjusted textures. They learned preferences without asking questions. Care existed, but it did not extend to prevention. It extended only to accommodation. In this environment, the closed smile became a skill. It communicated warmth without exposure. It allowed participation without risk. It protected both dignity and comfort. Over time, it felt natural. Pain did not demand attention because it did not disrupt appearance. As long as the face remained composed, nothing needed correcting. The system functioned as intended. At night, when the mouth rested and the room quieted, discomfort surfaced briefly. The tongue explored absence. The jaw settled cautiously. Relief came slowly, if at all. Morning restored routine before reflection could form. This was not ignorance. It was prioritization. Sugar symbolized status. Teeth were secondary. The exchange was accepted without debate, and so sweetness continued to circulate, admired for what it represented rather than what it removed. The smile remained closed, elegant, and controlled, carrying silence gently where explanation might have disturbed the calm. Adaptation without repair. Once teeth began to fail, repair was not the goal. Adaptation was. Royal life adjusted smoothly, without urgency, without complaint, and without the expectation that damage required correction. The mouth, like so many other parts of the body, learned to operate within limitation rather than resist it. Food became strategy. Texture mattered more than flavor. Meals softened quietly, evolving into soups, porridges, custards, and stews that required little effort. What could not be eaten comfortably simply ceased to appear on individual plates. The table remained abundant. The experience remained ceremonial. Only the act of eating shifted, subtly and privately. Speech adapted in similar ways. Words were chosen with care, conversations slowed, pauses lengthened. Silence, already associated with refinement, became practical. A measured response suggested thoughtfulness. A brief reply suggested restraint. No one needed to know that speaking too long or too broadly caused discomfort. The closed smile perfected this adaptation. Lips curved gently. Eyes did more of the work. Expression communicated warmth without revelation. This form of smiling was praised as elegant, controlled, and dignified. It also happened to conceal what no longer wished to be seen. In portraits, mouths remained relaxed and sealed. Teeth rarely appeared. This aesthetic choice aligned beautifully with reality. When teeth decayed or disappeared, no visual standard was violated. Art and etiquette cooperated, protecting both image and comfort. There is a quiet humor in how thoroughly elegance accommodated loss. When teeth vanished, standards shifted just enough to make their absence irrelevant. No apology was required. Refinement absorbed the change without disruption. Pain, when present, was managed discreetly. Clove oil dulled sensation. Pressure was avoided. Jaw movements softened. These adjustments were personal, not public. Public life continued unaffected. Ceremony did not pause for discomfort. Language performed its familiar task of softening consequence. Tooth loss was not framed as decay. It was framed as sensitivity. Weak teeth, delicate mouths. Once again, the body carried responsibility while habit remained unquestioned. Servants learned patterns. They prepared suitable textures. They noticed preferences without asking why. Assistance existed, but prevention did not. The system responded to outcomes, not causes. Sugar remained a marker of status. Its presence did not diminish because of its effects. It symbolized access, trade, and power. To refuse it openly would have suggested limitation. Acceptance mattered more than comfort. Over time, these adaptations felt natural. The mouth learned restraint. The face learned composure. The absence of teeth did not isolate anyone socially because the social structure had already removed the need to reveal them. This arrangement worked because it asked so little of those it protected. It required silence, patience, and conformity. All were abundant. At night, when the mouth rested and attention drifted inward, sensation returned briefly. The tongue explored spaces where teeth once were. The jaw settled cautiously. Relief came slowly. Morning restored performance before awareness could deepen. There is something deeply calm about this rhythm. Loss did not interrupt life. It was integrated. Elegance absorbed damage without acknowledging it. And so the closed smile endured, not as denial, but as adaptation perfected. It allowed participation without exposure, dignity without explanation, and continuity without correction. The system remained intact because it never demanded repair, it only demanded adjustment. And adjustment, when framed as refinement, rarely feels like sacrifice. When absence became etiquette, eventually the absence of teeth stopped being noticed as absence at all. It became part of the expected shape of refinement. A composed face did not require a full mouth. It required control. And control, once learned, replaced correction entirely. The closed smile matured into an ideal. Lips curved gently, never opening wide enough to invite inspection. Eyes carried expression. Brows suggested warmth or restraint. The mouth became a quiet border rather than a display. In this way, elegance adjusted its definition without announcing the change. Pain, when it lingered, remained private. It surfaced only in moments where no one was watching. It did not interrupt conversation or ceremony. It did not demand sympathy. The ability to continue despite discomfort was admired. Endurance became subtle proof of character. This expectation shaped behavior from an early age. Children learned how much of their mouth to show. They practiced restraint long before they understood why it mattered. Laughter softened, speech moderated. Smiling became measured rather than spontaneous. What began as etiquette became instinct. There is something quietly unsettling about how smoothly this transition occurred. No one declared new rules. No one acknowledged loss. The system simply absorbed it, adjusting standards until the change disappeared from notice. Portraits preserved this silence. Faces remained serene, lips sealed. Teeth, if present at all, were hinted at rather than revealed. Art reinforced expectation. Expectation protected reality. In daily life, adaptation continued to replace repair. Food softened further. Eating slowed. Pleasure shifted from taste to presentation. Sweets remained admired for their symbolism even when they could no longer be enjoyed fully. Display mattered more than consumption. Language completed the process. Toothlessness was not named. It was folded into temperament, age, or constitution. Responsibility rested gently on the individual body. Habit remained untouched. This approach spared society from reconsideration. No reform was necessary. No new practices needed introducing. Elegance simply evolved to accommodate damage without ever admitting it existed. At night, when attention drifted inward and performance paused, the mouth rested quietly, gums settled, the tongue traced familiar gaps. Sensation remained, but urgency did not. Morning would restore composure before thought could linger. This rhythm encouraged acceptance. Loss did not feel like crisis. It felt like progression, a natural narrowing of expression that aligned conveniently with existing ideals of restraint. The closed smile, perfected over time, allowed participation without exposure. It kept discomfort out of sight and conversation intact. It preserved dignity while asking nothing in return except silence. And perhaps this is the quiet truth beneath the chapter. Teeth were not lost loudly. They were surrendered politely. Elegance absorbed the cost without comment, allowing society to continue admiring sweetness without addressing what sweetness consumed. As night deepens and awareness softens, it becomes easier to understand how such arrangements endured. They did not disrupt. They did not demand change. They asked only for patience and compliance, both of which were plentiful. The mouth closed gently, the smile softened, silence settled comfortably where explanation might have been. And in that silence, refinement rested, undisturbed, carrying forward a tradition that valued appearance over repair, control over correction, and calm over acknowledgement, night after quiet night, until absence itself felt indistinguishable from elegance, and no one remembered why the mouth had learned to remain closed at all. Chapter 7. Layers without comfort. Shaping the body, not protecting it. Fashion in royal Europe was never designed to serve the body, it was designed to instruct it. Clothing did not exist to offer warmth, ease, or freedom of movement. It existed to shape, restrain, and declare. Comfort was not forgotten, it was deliberately excluded. Corsets formed the foundation of this system. They were not optional, they were essential. Laced tightly, reinforced with bone or wood, they compressed the torso into an approved silhouette. Breathing adapted, digestion adjusted, organs shifted quietly. None of this was discussed openly. The visible result mattered far more than the internal negotiation required to maintain it. Above the corset came layers, petticoats, skirts, bodices, sleeves, fabrics stacked upon one another until the body disappeared beneath structure. Movement slowed naturally, sitting required planning, standing demanded balance, walking became deliberate. Grace emerged not from ease but from constraint practiced over time. These garments were heavy. Thick cloth insulated the body from air and from itself. Heat accumulated. Perspiration lingered. Ventilation was minimal. The solution was not removal. It was endurance. To withstand discomfort without visible strain was admired. Struggle suggested weakness. Control suggested refinement. Fashion here did not protect against environment. It protected against unpredictability. The body, once shaped and contained, behaved more predictably. Posture stabilized, gesture limited itself, expression softened. Clothing acted as discipline made visible. There is a quiet irony in how much effort was required to appear effortless. Hours of dressing disappeared beneath the illusion of composure. Servants pulled laces carefully, tightening gradually to avoid collapse. The body learned to cooperate. Resistance was discouraged early. Women grew into these garments. Training began young. The rib cage adapted. Muscles adjusted. What once felt restrictive became familiar. Familiarity softened discomfort into background sensation, present but rarely urgent. Fashion manuals praised the resulting form. Narrow waists suggested virtue. Upright posture suggested self-command. Stillness suggested dignity. None of these qualities required comfort. They required compliance. The body learned its place within the system. It did not rebel, it adapted. Adaptation was framed as maturity. Those who endured gracefully were admired. Those who struggled visibly were corrected. At court, appearance functioned as language. Clothing spoke before the wearer did. It announced status, wealth, and patience. Patience mattered. Only those with time and assistance could maintain such elaborate forms. Constraint itself became proof of privilege. Comfort, meanwhile, belonged to other spaces. Private rooms, unobserved moments. Night offered brief relief when layers were loosened slightly. But even then, structure remained. Full release risked vulnerability. Morning would require rebuilding. There is something deeply calm about how thoroughly discomfort was normalized. Nothing was urgent enough to justify change. The system functioned. The symbols remained legible. As long as the body performed its role quietly, the surface continued to shine. And so the layers endured. Fabric upon fabric, shape upon shape. The body learned to exist inside design rather than inside itself. Comfort was never the goal. Meaning was. Endurance as elegance. What made these layers remarkable was not their beauty alone, but the expectation attached to wearing them. Clothing was not simply something you put on, it was something you endured. And endurance, when performed quietly, became elegance. Royal garments demanded stillness. The more structured the outfit, the less room there was for sudden movement. Turning too quickly could pull seams. Sitting carelessly could crease carefully trained shapes. Even breathing required a certain rhythm. Shallow, controlled, polite. The body learned to cooperate with fabric, not the other way around. This cooperation was praised. A woman who moved easily despite the weight and rigidity of her clothing was admired. Not because the clothing was comfortable, but because she appeared unaffected by discomfort. That appearance mattered more than sensation. Pain, heat, restriction, these were private matters. Public life required composure. There was no vocabulary for complaint. Discomfort was not framed as harm. It was framed as normal. The body, after all, was expected to adjust, and it usually did. Slowly, silently, over years. Clothing shaped posture from childhood. Girls were taught to sit straight, stand still, and accept tightening as part of dressing. The corset did not arrive suddenly. It arrived gradually. Each year, slightly firmer, slightly closer. The body adapted in increments small enough to be tolerated. By adulthood, what would have felt unbearable to an untrained body felt familiar. Not pleasant, familiar. Familiarity created calm. Calm created the illusion of ease. Movement became economical. Gestures reduced themselves. Excess motion was inefficient and unnecessary. Grace emerged from limitation. This was not accidental. It was learned behavior reinforced daily. Fabric reinforced hierarchy as well. The more layers one wore, the less physical labor one could perform. This was the point. Impractical clothing demonstrated distance from necessity. It announced that survival was handled elsewhere, by other bodies, in other rooms. Sweat accumulated beneath silk and wool. Heat lingered. The body responded as bodies do. None of this was discussed. There were powders, perfumes, and undergarments to absorb what could not be eliminated. Again, not removal, management. The quiet humor lies in how much work went into appearing untouched by work. The garments themselves required constant care, brushing, airing, repairing, adjusting. Servants managed the clothing so the wearer could manage the image. And the image mattered. Clothing stabilized identity. It signaled role. A woman in structured layers was not meant to bend easily, physically, or socially. Her clothing reminded her and everyone else of her place. There is something strangely soothing in the consistency of it all. Day after day, the same ritual, lacing, layering, adjusting. The body surrendered to routine. Routine softened resistance. In this world, comfort was not a goal to be achieved. It was a distraction to be avoided. Ease might lead to informality. Informality threatened hierarchy. Hierarchy depended on visible effort, so effort became invisible. Pain became quiet. Restriction became graceful. The body learned to exist within rules so thoroughly that those rules felt natural. And when discomfort faded into background sensation, it stopped asking questions. That perhaps was the most effective layer of all. When clothing became belief. Over time, these layers stopped feeling like objects and began to feel like truth. Clothing did not simply shape the body, it shaped expectation. What a woman could do, how long she could stand, how far she could walk, how loudly she could speak. All of it quietly adjusted itself to fabric. The garments taught limits without needing instruction. A tightly laced bodice discouraged deep breaths. A wide skirt discouraged haste. Heavy sleeves slowed gestures. The body learned what was allowed before the mind ever questioned it. Constraint became education. This was not always experienced as cruelty. Often it felt orderly, predictable. The structure provided clarity. Within rigid clothing, roles were clear. Movement was measured. Behavior followed form. There was comfort in knowing exactly how much space one was permitted to occupy. To remove layers was to feel exposed in more ways than one. Without structure, posture softened. Movements felt uncertain. The body, briefly free, felt strangely unfinished. Clothing had become a frame for identity. Without it, something essential felt missing. This is where belief entered quietly. Not belief in fashion, but belief in necessity. The idea that this was how things were meant to be. That elegance required effort. That effort required endurance. That endurance proved worth. Even moments of private relief were temporary. Laces loosened at night, but not undone. Skirts removed, but underlayers remained. Complete release was rare. The body rested within partial freedom, knowing full reconstruction would come with morning light. The social world reinforced this belief gently. Compliments praised posture, not comfort. Beauty was described as composed, controlled, restrained. Ease was admired only when it appeared accidental. Visible struggle was unseemly. Visible effort was vulgar. And so women learned to disappear inside design. The body existed to support the silhouette. Hunger, heat, fatigue. These were managed quietly. Language offered no place for them. Instead, there were terms like delicacy, sensitivity, temperament, polite words that allowed endurance to continue without interruption. There's a soft irony here. The more clothing restricted the body, the more it was praised for restraint. Stillness was interpreted as grace, silence as refinement, endurance as virtue. Clothing did not simply cover flesh, it translated discomfort into social value. This translation was remarkably stable. It persisted across generations. Mothers adjusted daughters, servants repeated rituals. The system reproduced itself through habit rather than force. No one needed to argue for it. It simply existed. And within that existence, the body adapted again. Muscles strengthened where needed. Balance improved. Breathing found new rhythms. Pain dulled into familiarity. Familiarity became background noise. The mind rested in routine. There is something deeply late night about this realization. The calm acceptance, the quiet trade between sensation and meaning. Nothing dramatic needed to happen for this system to endure. It survived on repetition, belief, and the gentle pressure of expectation. Clothing, in the end, became more than material. It became agreement. Agreement between body and society. agreement that comfort was optional, that appearance was essential, that endurance was elegant when done silently. And perhaps that is why these layers lasted so long. Not because they were loved, but because they made sense within a world that valued control over ease. When the fabric finally loosened centuries later, it was not relief that arrived first. It was uncertainty. Chapter 8: Bathing as a Rare Ritual. When water required permission. Bathing in royal Europe did not belong to the rhythm of the day. It was not folded gently between waking and sleeping, not treated as a quiet habit performed without thought. Bathing existed outside routine. It waited, it hesitated, it required permission. Water itself was never the problem. Palaces had wells, cities were threaded with rivers. Servants carried buckets endlessly, their footsteps soft against stone floors. What made bathing rare was not absence, but doubt. Doubt about what water might do once it touched the body. Warm water in particular carried suspicion. It softened skin, it relaxed muscle, it opened what physicians of the time believed should remain closed. Pores were imagined as tiny doors, and warm water as an invitation. What entered through those doors was never clearly defined, only feared. Illness, imbalance, weakness. All seemed eager to drift in with steam. The human body was not understood as resilient. It was understood as vulnerable, permeable, a structure best preserved through caution. And so cleanliness became a matter of judgment rather than habit. Bathing was weighed carefully against season and circumstance. Winter was an easy answer. No bathing? Cold air and warm water together were thought to court disaster. Summer allowed discussion, but not enthusiasm. Even then, bathing was approached slowly, with hesitation disguised as wisdom. When a bath was finally decided upon, it arrived as an event. A wooden tub had to be brought into the room, water heated in stages, buckets carried, poured, carried again. The labor alone discouraged frequency, hours of preparation for minutes of immersion. Privacy was rare. A woman did not bathe alone, not because of modesty, but because assistance was required. Heavy garments needed careful removal. Entering the tub demanded balance. Exiting it demanded strength. Someone always stood nearby, steadying, managing, watching. Even nudity was incomplete. Linen shifts were sometimes worn into the water. The body remained partially covered, even during an act meant to cleanse it. Exposure was tolerated only in fragments. The water itself was precious once prepared. It was rarely changed. Heating it again required time and fuel. If more than one person bathed, they did so in order of rank. The most important body entered first. Cleanliness followed hierarchy. The experience was not indulgent. It was controlled, slightly tense. There was no lingering soak, no quiet surrender to warmth. Bathing was something to complete efficiently, to finish politely, to survive without consequence. Afterward, there was no celebration of freshness. The body was patted dry with cloth, sometimes dusted with powder, sometimes lightly perfumed. The aim was not renewal, it was closure. The ritual had occurred. The risk had been managed. Bathing in this world did not promise comfort. It promised compliance. A brief, cautious interaction with water before returning to safer practices. Water was never trusted. It was tolerated briefly under supervision, and then politely avoided again. Powder, scent, and the management of the body. Because bathing was rare, alternatives quietly took its place. The body, after all, continued to exist. It produced heat. It responded to layers of fabric. It reacted to movement. Biology did not pause for etiquette. So the problem was not how to eliminate bodily reality, but how to manage it. Powder became one solution: fine, pale, lightly scented. Applied to skin, to hair, to underlayers of clothing, it absorbed oil, it dulled shine, it softened evidence. Powder did not remove moisture so much as persuade it to behave. White powder carried its own language. It suggested dryness, control, restraint. It hid what could not be addressed directly. Reapplication was constant, discreet, ritualized. Servants carried small containers. Touch-ups happened quietly, without comment. Scent followed naturally. Perfume was not decoration, it was strategy. Floral notes layered over heavier bases. Rose, violet, amber, musk. Not a drop, a system. Hair was treated, gloves were soaked, fabric absorbed fragrance willingly, chairs and cushions joined the effort. Rooms themselves began to carry scent long after bodies had left them. Some spaces became defined less by architecture than by atmosphere. You did not step into them, you encountered them. Scent arrived first, announcing presence before a person ever spoke. Perfume did not say, "I am clean." It said something subtler. "Do not look too closely." And remarkably, this worked. The nose was convinced, the eye reassured, the mind followed. People accepted what they experienced. Cleanliness became something perceived rather than proven. This required maintenance. Perfume faded. Powder shifted. Bodies persisted. So the rituals repeated. Again and again, far more often than bathing ever occurred. There is a quiet humor in how much effort went into avoiding water, so many gestures, so many tools, all designed to simulate what a simple bath might have achieved had it been trusted. But water was unpredictable. Powder and scent were obedient. They stayed where they were placed. They did not seep unexpectedly. They did not shock the body. They offered control. Over time, these substitutes became normal, expected, necessary. A woman freshly powdered and scented was considered maintained. The details underneath no longer mattered. This created distance. Bodies became abstract. Physical reality softened into impression. Scent blurred edges. Powder reduced contrast. The body remained, but politely out of focus. Hygiene in this system was no longer a physical condition. It was a social agreement. Everyone participated. Everyone understood the rules. No one insisted on proof. Bathing remained in the background as an option of last resort. Powder and perfume handled daily life. Water waited quietly, unused. And so the illusion held. Day after day. Layer after layer. The body was managed, not cleaned, and that was enough. Cleanliness as an idea, not a practice. Over time, cleanliness stopped referring to the body at all. It drifted upward, away from skin and sweat, into the realm of symbols. A clean person was not someone recently washed. A clean person was composed. Composure mattered more than condition. Control mattered more than comfort. If appearance remained undisturbed, reality beneath it could be ignored. Bathing, therefore, did not need to be frequent. It only needed to exist as a concept, as reassurance that in moments of absolute necessity, water could be summoned. Most of the time, appearance did the work. Layers hid the body. Powder softened it. Scent reframed it. The physical truth underneath lost relevance. This system aligned neatly with broader values. Restraint was admired, excess was suspect. The body, when too present, threatened decorum. Better to manage it quietly. Discomfort was not denied. It was simply absorbed. Heat endured. Odor masked. Moisture redirected. The goal was never elimination, only control. Bathing disrupted control. It required exposure, vulnerability. Water touched everything equally. It did not respect rank. That alone made it unsettling. So bathing remained rare, ritualized, spoken of lightly, if at all, something to endure politely and forget quickly. In the quiet of night, this arrangement feels strangely calm, predictable, stable. No urgency demanded change. The body adapted, society adjusted, meaning settled into place. Cleanliness became an idea rather than a state. Something you signaled, not something you pursued. A performance, not a process. As long as the signals remained convincing, the reality underneath stayed unexamined. An examination was unnecessary, even dangerous. Bathing, when it occurred, closed quietly behind the door. No announcement, no transformation, just completion. Powder waited patiently, scent lingered in the air, layers returned, and the illusion held soft, fragrant, and remarkably persistent. Chapter 9. The Scent of Power. When hygiene became performance. In this world, hygiene was never meant to erase the body. It was meant to manage how the body was perceived. Cleanliness was not a condition. It was an impression, carefully arranged and politely maintained. To be considered acceptable, one did not need to be freshly washed. One needed to appear composed, still, elevated. If the image held, the reality beneath it could wait. And it did. Power, after all, does not need to explain itself. It only needs to remain unquestioned. Scent played a crucial role in this arrangement. It was not merely pleasant, it was assertive. Fragrance entered a room before the person did. It established presence. It claimed space. It replaced uncertainty with atmosphere. If you smelled power, you were less inclined to question it. Perfume in royal courts was layered deliberately. Top notes announced refinement. Base notes lingered with authority. The scent did not whisper. It spoke clearly and often loudly. This was not accidental. It was design. The body underneath continued its quiet biological routines. Heat rose, moisture gathered, fatigue settled. None of this was denied. It was simply managed. Clothing absorbed scent. Powder softened edges. Gloves and lace became carriers of identity. Even furniture joined the effort. Chairs remembered those who sat upon them. Curtains held conversations long after they ended. In such spaces, biology felt distant, abstract. The senses were guided elsewhere. Attention moved upward toward image and ritual, away from flesh. Silence played its part as well. There was no language for discomfort, no polite way to mention it, so it went unspoken. And what goes unspoken often ceases to exist, at least socially. To comment on another's physical reality was improper. To notice was rude. To ask was unthinkable. This collective restraint protected everyone involved. The illusion required cooperation. Servants participated, courtiers complied, visitors adjusted their expectations quickly. One learned instinctively what not to acknowledge. In this way, hygiene became a shared fiction, maintained not through water, but through agreement. The irony lies in how effective this was. As long as the performance remained convincing, the truth beneath it lost urgency. The body could wait, and it did, for generations. Authority, distance, and the right to remain unquestioned. Power creates distance, physical, social, emotional, and distance allows certain realities to fade. In royal life, this distance was reinforced constantly. Clothing widened space, etiquette slowed interaction, titles replaced names. The body, already abstracted, became further removed. Scent helped maintain that distance. It filled the air between people. It softened proximity. You could stand near authority without truly approaching it. To smell someone was not to know them. It was to encounter an idea. This mattered. The closer one is to another body, the harder it becomes to ignore biology. Distance preserves illusion, and illusion preserves order. Those at the top benefited most. Their physical realities were least accessible, least discussed, least acknowledged. Power insulated them from scrutiny. If something was amiss, it was reframed. Fatigue became delicacy. Illness became sensitivity. Discomfort became temperament. Language adjusted itself to preserve dignity. No one lied outright. They simply chose kinder words, softer explanations, polite silence. The system did not require cruelty, it required consistency. Everyone knew how to behave, what to notice, what to ignore. This extended beyond scent and cleanliness. It shaped how bodies were understood at all. A royal body was not merely flesh, it was symbol, representation, continuity. Symbols are not expected to sweat, so when biological reality intruded, and it always did, it was quietly managed, absorbed by layers, masked by fragrance, redirected by ritual. There is something almost tender in how carefully this illusion was maintained. No sudden breaks, no dramatic confrontations, just steady, gentle redirection. The body was not denied, it was postponed. Authority allowed this postponement to last far longer than it otherwise could have. When no one dares to speak, silence becomes policy. And so the truth waited. It waited behind lace and powder, behind scent and ceremony, behind the collective decision to look elsewhere, for a very long time. When biology finally spoke louder than image, eventually, of course, reality always finds a way to surface, not suddenly, not dramatically, but persistently. The body does not negotiate forever. It adapts, it compensates, and then quietly it insists. Over centuries, the balance shifted. Medical understanding changed, urban life transformed, new ideas about health emerged. Slowly, water lost some of its danger. Cleanliness gained new meaning. But for a long time, the old system held, because it made sense within its world. It aligned with values of restraint, hierarchy, and control. The scent of power was more convincing than the smell of truth. Even as practices changed, the memory lingered. The association between refinement and distance, between elegance and endurance, between image and worth, These ideas do not vanish quickly. They fade gradually, softened by repetition and revision. Looking back, there is no need to judge, only to observe, to notice how easily humans adapt to systems that reward silence. This story is not about filth or excess. It is about management, about how societies decide what matters and what can wait. In this world, hygiene was never meant to clean. It was meant to maintain order. If you looked noble, if you smelled refined, if no one dared to speak, then biology could be patient. And it was. For centuries, the body waited its turn, quietly, politely, under layers of silk, powder, and the soft, persistent scent of power. Epilogue, the quiet agreement with the body. So this, quietly, was the arrangement. Not a secret pact, not ignorance, and certainly not stupidity, just a long, polite understanding that the human body, while persistent, could be postponed. That biology did not need to be confronted as long as it remained managed. Cleanliness in this world was never abandoned. It was simply redefined into something safer, something less intrusive, something that did not require water or honesty. Powder absorbed what could not be removed. Scent replaced questions with atmosphere. Silence filled the gaps. And everyone agreed, without ever formally agreeing, that this was preferable. What makes this illusion remarkable is how calm it felt from the inside. Nothing about it seemed chaotic. Ritual replaced urgency. Routine softened discomfort into background noise. The body adjusted slowly, learning not to interrupt. Corsets trained posture, layers controlled movement, and etiquette taught people when not to notice. Words helped too. Delicate, sensitive, temperamental. Soft labels that allowed real sensations to pass without discussion. No one thought they were denying reality. They believed they were managing it wisely. Power made all of this easier. When no one dares to speak, silence becomes confirmation. When no one comments, endurance feels natural. And so the body waited beneath fabric, fragrance, and ceremony, not erased, only delayed. This was not cruelty. It was postponement. And postponement, when shared by an entire society, can last for centuries. Perhaps that is why this story belongs to the late hours, when things slow down enough to be observed without urgency. Because it is not a tale of shock or scandal. It is a gentle study of how humans adapt to systems that reward restraint, composure, and quiet endurance. Of how easily comfort is traded for approval, and how appearance is allowed to stand in for well-being. In candlelit corridors heavy with perfume, bodies moved carefully, breath measured, complaints unspoken. Everyone played their role beautifully, believing this was intelligence, refinement, even care. There is no need to judge them from here. History is not a courtroom. It is a dim room where we sit and notice patterns, and the pattern is familiar. Even now, we understand the temptation to manage the surface before addressing the substance, to look composed rather than feel well, to postpone discomfort instead of listening to it. The costumes change, the logic remains. So as the story settles, there is nothing left to expose, only something to release. Let the layers loosen, let the rituals rest, let the body exist without explanation or performance. Thank you for staying with this quiet history, for listening to what was never shouted. This has been a gentle walk through illusion, patience, and perfume. Good night. Sleep well, and may your comfort never again need permission.